Okay, I am going to go ahead and just kick things off and start our webinar, and I'm sure some other folks are going to pop in and join us. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Jessica Bryson. She is a practice consultant with Impact 360 and Gaidge, and she is going to host today's Advanced Gaidge webinar. She is completely magical in every way, and I'm so thrilled to have her host her today with her insights, share some knowledge. Jessica has over 20 years of experience in all areas of the orthodontic practice, everything from clinical to financial to treatment coordinator, practice management, marketing. Jessica is a TC faculty member with Align Technologies, and she also helps us on the Gaidge side with implementations as well as business coaching. And finally, she is a mom to Jack, and she is a fur mom to a dog called Cole, and she has named that dog Colicious the Vicious. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica. If you have questions along the way, we would encourage you just to use the chat box, ask questions. We will stop several times throughout the webinar and address any questions you have. And from now, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Jessica.
Well, thank you, Katie. That was a very kind introduction. I'm really excited that you guys have joined me today for this advanced Gaidge training. Those of you who know me know that I'm here because I started out in an orthodontic practice like Katie shared, and I utilize Gaidge every day, and it really did help me do business better. So today, as we round out the year, I want to walk you through of a few of my favorite things Gaidge style. So along the way, please add comments or questions to the comment box. I know Katie mentioned that as well. We have several other customer care team members around us today. And if you have questions that I can't answer, I can promise you that we will find an answer for you. So moving ahead, first, I think it's very important that if you haven't already, you must download the Gaidge app onto your phone. So open up your apps, search Gaidge in the App Store. I can't imagine being an advanced Gaidge user and not having this resource at my disposal. So as many of you know, Gaidge updates nightly, and this is a very easy way to check your monthly progress, to check your daily progress, quite honestly, when it's convenient for you. So I know a lot of times as practice leaders, we're drinking from the water hose and there's a lot of moving parts. And this is just a really wonderful way to make sure that you're not paying attention to some of those very important key metrics. Next is Gaidge notifications. So within Gaidge, you can set up team members to receive notifications. You get to choose whether you want those to be sent via email weekly or monthly. But again, another way to bring visibility to what's going on in your practice and just make sure that that is something that you're paying attention to. A really cool feature about these emails as well is once you click on them, it brings you over to main Gaidge, and you're able to dig deeper and find out, if there is a red flag, what is it? And of course, start thinking about how to improve it. The QR code will take you directly to instructions on our Gaidge Help site on how to set notifications within your practice. So speaking of Gaidge Help, this is a newish space for us. Gaidge Help hosts documents and training to support your Gaidge journey. Personally, I reference it quite often, especially when I'm working with new practices. Something really fantastic about this particular site as well is there are how-to videos. So I know we've all had some turnover and new team members. So for additional new adds to your team, there is a video called Tour of Gaidge. It's within this how-to spot. And for me, it's just really wonderful. It really helps kind of acclimate your team members on data and, of course, gives them some tips and tricks on how to leverage that data to help support you in running your practice. So do you guys have any questions or comments in the box, Katie, that we need to address to this point about these resources?
Jessica, no questions as of now.
Beautiful. All right. So I think that we can all agree that there's two ways to grow your practice, right? There's the obvious, which is to produce more. And then there is to improve your efficiencies and, of course, decrease your overhead. One of our consultants, Sue Hannon, shares this statement, and I love it. Having Gaidge is like turning on a light in a dark room. So you don't know what you don't know, right? You can't do anything about it if you don't know it. And so Gaidge does help provide that level of transparency so that you can start making really educated business decisions. Today, we're going to talk about and start off with the progress report, which is where you set goals and talk about projections a little bit. The other thing that we're going to talk through is production and collections, is treatment fees. We're going to start also in the starts and exam space, talking about origin of start. Observation, I'm going to just touch on this a little bit, kind of mining for those age-appropriate OBS-ready children. Looking at your schedule, I want to talk about repairs. My background as a clinical coordinator really, I love looking at this part, so I want to share it with you. And then, of course, treatment efficiencies, estimated versus actual. So I know we've experienced some high highs and low lows over the past year, and each of you have, a pretty special or unique position to your area, but I do firmly believe that the most high performing practices take a strategic approach in managing. If there are additional areas that you would like to cover that we don't talk about today, we have a plan to do ongoing trainings and provide resources to help our Gaidge family get more out of Gaidge. So please, again, just let us know what those are, and we'll be happy to consider them in some of our future trainings. So, progress reports, goals, and projections. So why are goals important? Well, first of all, they keep us focused. The challenge of successful goal setting is learning to stay focused on your goals while also remaining flexible enough to adapt to all the changing pieces of our environment, right? So that's why it's so important to monitor those goals, discuss them regularly, and talk about where your misses are and where your wins are. So speaking of changes, looking at some of our economic disruptors this year, we've had three really main buckets. We've, of course, the COVID pandemic. Coming out of that, we're hoping we're on the tail end of it, right? But we still have some, supply chain challenges, and, it's improving, but that's still something to consider when setting goals. Looking at the workforce revolution, I don't know about you specifically, but I've talked to many practices who've had, a lot of turnover. Some people have had a complete kind of rebirth of their team. Others are just having a hard time finding people. It's a more competitive market, and it's a little harder to find talent. Three, economic volatility. Of course, the stock market, sorry about that, is down a little bit. Interest rates are up. Gas hit an all-time high this year. And while we're back at a more comfortable spot with that, I'm sure that all of you know a trip to the grocery store looks much differently than it did a couple of years back. So I say that to say these outside resources, they can cause fear, but again, through data and strategy, we have an opportunity to reduce the impact of our economics on our practices. So some other things to consider when setting goals are your treatment fees. What are your treatment fees? Are you going to raise them, right? Market investment and strategy. So do you have a marketing plan? Do you have a strong strategy with marketing dollars behind it to help encourage patients to call your practice, to basically increase the new patients that are coming to your door? What does your competition look like? Are you in a competitive space where you're having to share quite a bit of your market? Are you an established practice or a new practice? That can make a big difference on, what you set your goals to be as you move ahead. Operating needs, your overhead, what do you need to make, right? So I think that's a really important piece too, is what do you need to bring in? What do you need to produce to cover your operational needs? Current opportunities, this is where we're going to spend a little bit more time today, is looking for opportunities that are already there to make more money. I know Katie talked about in her previous webinar ways to find out how much lost potential there are in patients who we might be mishandling from that call to exam. So just making sure that we don't have leaky buckets in our current processes and we're not leaving money on the table. And then, of course, capacity. It's very hard to say, we need to see 100 new patients this month, but only have room for 50. So taking a step back and looking at what can you fit into your schedule? How much can you grow? I think those are important things to consider as well. So individual practice goals, again, they should be customized. If you're working with a practice management consultant, this is really the perfect time to collaborate with them on your 2023 goals. And if you're not, of course, like Katie shared, we have an amazing team at Impact 360. So just asking for some advice from those people who you value in this area would be really beneficial at helping you set yourself up for success. So setting goals in Gaidge, we have two ways. The first way is where you set them directly from your progress report. The other is a little bit more focused, and it has some really, really cool features that I'm excited to share with you. And that's where you start with the projections tool. So the projections tool, it isn't on main Gaidge, but it is available through our executive membership. So a few other areas that are available with our executive membership are overhead, where we actually, combine now, kind of bring everything into a full circle and attach to and integrate to your accounting software. So there's a lot of other information that's available other than projections, but I just wanted to put that out there because I do want to show you both methods. If you haven't had a demo with the executive program and you would like to learn more about it, I did want to pop up a QR code so you could schedule a demo. I'm only going to touch on it today and not go into too much detail, but I wanted you to have that opportunity. So I am going to start with the progress report. And I also want to let you know that even if you set your goals in projections, they're all going to bubble up into the progress report and show on your daily progress report in Gaidge. Katie so fondly recalls, names this the morning huddle sheet, and I couldn't agree more. It's such a great way to look each morning and check your progress and see, how much more do you need to meet your monthly goals, and of course, how much more to meet your yearly goals. So at this point, I'm going to bounce over to Gaidge. So just give me just 1 second to switch screens. Perfect. All right. Katie, can you see my Gaidge? Take that as a yes.
Yes. So sorry.
All right. So
yes, we can see your screen.
Perfect. I was like, it's kind of hard to see what everyone else is. So thank you for that. So starting on the Gaidge dashboard, as many of you know, this is your 30,000 foot view. I've set our date range to be January through November for viewing today. Something else I really just want to point out is your last refresh date. I know many of you are advanced users, but this is my eyes automatically. Every time I log into Gaidge, this is the first spot they go. I want to make sure that I'm comparing apples to apples when I'm looking back at my practice management data. So over on the left-hand side, we have the goals option. So I'm going to start in the progress report. All right. So if you'll notice, this is a pretty lengthy sheet, and every item that is underlined and has a hyperlink, you can click directly on to set goals. Not only is this going to show you your % of goal attained for the month, but it's also going to show year to date. You can see your daily production, your daily net production, all of November, what you did same month last year. And of course, once we have a goal set, that's going to show there as well. I'm going to click on net production and walk you through how to set this. Oh, before I do that, if you have multiple locations, you have the opportunity to select and set goals by location and then have them all kind of bubble up together into your entire practice. So some folks decide they want practice level goals, others prefer just to do it from a high level, but just know you have the option. Today, I'm doing it, of course, just for the entire practice since we only have one location. So back to net production. This is going to share with us what we did in 2021, what was the attained value. And then of course, once we plug some numbers in, it's going to let us know what our 2022 goal is. And of course, this will look differently as you're planning for 2023. So for this practice, I'm going to select 5%. So when you select 5%, you also get to decide, do you want this to be a change over the last year? Or do you want it to set all months to the same value? As a consultant, I prefer change over last year because I think it's more important to consider the ebbs and flow of your practice production. Maybe you have some really large events that you do on an ongoing basis in May, and you can always expect a little bit more production. Maybe you take, 2 weeks off in June. And so not only would that make a difference on what you can expect to make in June, but let's say that you wanted to also take some of that anticipated or what you should be producing in June and spread it to the adjacent months, put it in May, and July so that you can make sure that you're still hitting those targets. So I think you can get pretty creative with this, but just know that you can come in and not only change it from a percentage, but you can also make adjustments that are really, special to your practice from a dollar perspective. Notice when I make that change that it's letting me know that we're only growing about 4% since I took away some of those dollars. So I'm going to save this so we can see what it looks like. And once you save it, you do want to hit refresh and hope that I don't mess anything up by hitting that. Had everything set perfectly. So we'll see. So what'll happen? Happened beautifully. So it's going to pop up and let us know this achievement bar lets us know that 100%, 106% of our goal was attained for the month of November. So this is amazing for this practice. And it also looks like that we're trending very well for the entire year. These goals will also populate back over onto your dashboard for that 30,000 foot view for the most recent month that's in your viewing range. If you don't set anything, I would at least recommend, or let me say that again, if you can't set everything, I completely understand that. I would at least set your production collections and your exams. Those are two that even if we're not particularly setting how many aligners we want or how many obs between phases that we're going to see, I really do want to at least have my production collections and of course those new patients added in exams. So I am going to look at the other way to set goals now. So through the projections option. And if you aren't a part of Gaidge Exec, then you may not be able to see this. I'm not 100% sure. But let's start. So within the projections feature, this is like so we set goals, right? We have an idea of what we want to make. We have some data. This takes it to a whole nother level. This is going to not only help you set your goals, but it's going to show you what's needed from a start standpoint, from a conversion standpoint to actually meet those goals and allow you to do a little bit of manipulation to see how if you improve your efficiencies, how that can affect your bottom line. So I am actually going to remove these goals for us to look at together. And I want to just get you acclimated with this view a little bit. The goals on the left, you have your increase increments plus and minus. You're going to have what happened in 2022, what your goal was in 2022, what actually happened in the previous year, the dollar goal change, and the percentage of goal change. Everything below the blue bar are going to be the starts that are needed to actually help you achieve those top level goals. One thing that I think is really fantastic about this feature, and again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about fees, but if you jump into your full braces, and let's say you're going to do a 2% increase. If I just put in a 2% increase, close that back up, and come up to the top, did I do that right? Let's see. Yes, perfect. Come back up to the top. It's going to let me know if I do exactly what I did last year and I just raise my fees on full treatment, this could be something close to what I would expect, right? And before I do this, because we're close to the end of the year, I should have done this before I started. I'm actually going to switch to 2023 because this is going to make a little bit more sense for us. So hang with me while I just quickly duplicate what I just did in 2022. There you go. I thought that number looked a little small. It's only because it was considering what was left of this year. And since we're well into December, of course, that number wasn't very much. Okay, so we're looking at a fresh year now, 2023. So doing a 2% increase on our full braces would give us a goal change of $44,000. It brings it up to about a 1.1% increase and lets us know as well, based on our history of collections, we can expect our net collections to change the following amount, $39,000 as well as 1% increase. So let's say I want to take this up to 5%. Coming over here, I'm going to do my little increments, big increments, little increments, whatever you want to call them, increments, and take myself up to around 5%. So with a 5% increase, I can anticipate or project to collect an additional 4.7% in net collections. As you move down, I just want to point this out too, clinical days worked. As an advanced Gaidge user, plugging in those clinical days worked, doctor hours, and staff hours is really critical at giving you an extra layer of information. So just make sure you're doing that as you move forward if you haven't been already. So looking at the goals that we have, new patients added, we would need to add an additional 45 new patients to our practice management software based on our new patient call to exam conversion, which is 90%. We would need to see an additional 39 exams to produce the 32 starts that we need to actually hit those net production goals as well. Something that I want to point out really quickly here is if you come into your new patient to exam conversion and you make small incremental changes. And what does this mean? Well, it means that I'm going to do better, right? So if I'm doing better at getting those patients who call our practice to the exam and actually getting an opportunity to present treatment to them, then I actually have to add less new patients. So when you think about that in a big picture, that means potentially less marketing dollars just by being more efficient. You can also do that same adjustment between your case acceptance and note if you increase your case acceptance, you also see the amount of exams that you're required to see decrease slightly. So all in all, I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but when you think about working smarter, not harder, this is where it's at. It's in those conversion points and being more efficient. Something else to point out before I save this over is that you can toggle between what it looks like as a big picture and of course, what it's going to look like on a daily aspect. So just wanted to share this with you. Once you're all finished, you save these goals. And of course, they're going to bounce over into your progress report and allow you to utilize this for a little bit less complex viewing as you're working through your monthly meetings. All right. So I'm gonna move on. Katie, are there any questions that I need to be aware of?
I see no questions in the chat, Jessica. You're good.
Wonderful. All right. So bouncing back into Gaidge, all of the fun stuff that I know everyone has. Dashboard, again, 30,000 foot view. I'm going to spend a little time within the report section. We've done a really beautiful job of sectioning out information. And I put it together in 3 different segments. So I've got your production collections and your AR, which is going to be your financial space. We have your exams and starts and your OBS, which is your revenue drivers, right? Those are your sources of revenue. And then we have your clinical and, your schedule and treatment efficiency, which is going to be more of the back of the house stuff. So this is also the spot where you get to select the date range when you choose your location that you want to view, and of course, where you can do comparisons too. So comparisons I find are really, really helpful at kind of gauging what's going on in our region. If you're a part of a specific study club, you can also, and they have a relationship with Gaidge, you can also do some comparison viewing for those groups as well. I am going to scroll down just a little bit. And again, there's so much information in Gaidge. We have over 90 KPIs. I'm really just going to try and pick one from each of these areas. And I think it's all critical, but one thing that I would say, it's even more critical that you guys are able to pick a couple items and put action to them when you get back to the office or when you start your 2023 planning. Another thing I think is extremely helpful is to bring in your other team members. Having all this information is fantastic, but if you don't bring other people in your boat and get them rowing in the same direction, it can sometimes feel like you're walking in quicksand. So bring in other team members. You can adjust what they're able to see. Maybe you don't want them to see money, but I can promise you as we move forward into this schedule and treatment efficiency, those items are really impactful for a clinical coordinator to view it and study. So under production and collections, average contract amount. We talked about this a little bit. One thing I want to point out, average contract amount, beside each of our titles is your info button. Even today, because there is so much information in Gaidge, I still utilize this quite a bit. So each of these info boxes are going to let you know what are you looking at, right? What information is in this particular chart and graph. If there is a formula, what is the formula? And of course, if there is a target, what is that target? All right. So Something else I love looking at is kind of building the story of how each of these metrics work together. So starting with your average contract amount, you want to hit around 5,150 plus or minus 100 on your average contract amount. And then of course you can build in how each of your other treatments, line up. So average full fee, average phase 1 fee, average phase 2 fee, average aligner fee. You can see where there's voids, may have been months where there may not have been full treatment fees. Again, this is someone's data that they've given us permission to use. So maybe they're not a very large phase 2 practice. Scrolling on down, you're going to see your average patient initial fee. I think we can all agree that flexibility is really important in getting people to commit, even more important to getting them to make same-day commitments. And all of that together, of course, does help improve your practice production. Something to know is if the initial fee is more than 50%, then it's not counted in your average initial fee. We're, looking at those a little bit closer to that paid in full space. So this is more of like the majority of your patients in most cases. So at the bottom of each graph, you're going to have a data grid or a locations detail. I like looking at the graphs, and this is just my personal preference, but when it comes to actually, it's more for a trend, but when it comes to making a business decision, like what we're going to be doing now and moving into the new year, I think it's really important to look at data, as an average, kind of look at a period of time as opposed to just kind of looking at a few months. That being said, as you roll down, you'll be able to see each of the items that were listed within your treatment fees, and you can see those over the months. Average contract amount is one of those areas where we bring in our Gaidge color health indicators. So we have red, yellow, green. I think that we all know what those mean, so I won't get into too much detail. But I do have a little exercise for you. If you have your phone, if you have your data, that's fantastic. Otherwise, maybe just jot this down. I think when you're considering fees, you've got to, or considering raising your fees, you have to kind of take into consideration, again, where we're at right now. And again, this is a sensitive individual conversation. It wouldn't be fair for me to give a blanket recommendation. But did you raise your fees last year, right? I think that's something to consider. Are you in a competitive environment and are you offering a competitive fee? Are your fees positioned to cover your overhead? I think that's important as well. And then also making sure that you have a healthy average contract amount. So one thing that I see often is practices that aren't charging adequately for phase 1 and phase 2. I think previously we were in this mindset where we just want to be very careful because we want them to do phase 1 and phase 2 for us. As practices, we're providing a huge value, not only to the patients, but the parents as well. A lot of times we're able to keep those kiddos from having permanent tooth extractions. We're able to save, facial structures and also just in general, make it easier on them. So making sure that you're charging enough for your phase 1 and phase 2 is important. So my exercise would be take out your calculator, scroll down within your data grid, take your average phase 1 fee, right? So we've got the $35.98 in this situation, add it to your average phase 2 fee, and write that down. We're going to clear out your calculator, so write that down. The next piece would be to take your average full fee, so that $57.22 in this particular case, and multiply it by 1.3. If the number on your calculator is higher than what your average phase 1 and phase 2 fee were added together, my consulting advice would be that you want to consider raising those fees. Again, consult with whomever you're working with and whoever you trust as an advisor, but also as someone who's worked in a practice, I want you to, make what you're worth, I guess, is what I would say. All right.
And Jessica, I do have a question before you move on this one. We have a couple.
Okay.
The first one is, could you repeat that one more time? And then I've got a secondary question, which would be, how can you change your average contract amount target, those Gaidge target benchmarks?
That's a great question. Katie, can we change targets or is that allowable under the consulting level?
The targets are based on Gaidge targets and not necessarily your own individual target. So those are kind of hard coded into the platform.
Right.
If you follow certain consultants, they may have a little bit tighter leeway for you there. And we can have a side discussion about that. So Christy, I'll send you a note, but those are set. The second question is, I think, would be the phase 1 plus phase 2
Yeah.
average contract amount.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a fast talker. I'm sorry, especially so when I get nervous. So take your phase 1 and phase 2 fee. So open your data grid, add your phase 1, add your phase 2, write that down, put it aside somewhere so that you remember what that number is. Clear your calculator out. Take your average full fee, which is your 55,722, multiply it by 1.3. That'll give you about a 30% increase on what your average full fee is. And if that number is higher than what the two phases added together equal, you may want to consider adding your phase 1 fee, your phase 2 fee, or maybe both. My goal is to have fees positioned so that those two fees added together are about 30% or more higher than what your average full treatment fee is. Was that good? Did it help?
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. All right. So exams and starts. I'm going to skip over the AR and delinquency. I think that could be our own webinar. Jumping into exams and starts, Katie, again, I mentioned this before, but she did a beautiful job kind of showing you how to find your lost opportunities. We also have a leaky bucket analysis video, a how-to video in Gaidge Help that'll walk you through how to do some of those calculations as well. But another spot to kind of pay attention to, and again, this is really lifting up the hood and getting a little bit nerdy on looking at all data from all different angles. But as you scroll down, many of you weren't tracking this before Gaidge. This is your origin of start. This is all of your avenues for starts. Where are your starts coming from? And again, a little bit nerdy, but you want to keep a really good eye on, the amount of starts that are coming from the exam room, the amount that are flowing from pending, how well are our TCs working in their pending patient follow-ups? How well are we getting people to take acceptance of treatment from the exam room? And the other, and quite honestly, sometimes the most overlooked, is our observation pool. You want to have around 25% or so or higher of your starts each month coming from your observation pool. A lot of times you can, just by being short-staffed or not having the resources to really manage that patient pool can really kind of, be negative to yourself and negative to your growth because of just kind of leaving that money on the table. So when you open up this data grid, you can come down probably about 3/4 of the way down and identify what percent of your starts are coming from your observation pool each month. This particular practice has a very healthy amount. Again, this may be very different for you if you're a brand new practice. You may not have quite built up those observation patients yet that maybe a more established practice would have. But just as a general benchmark, you want to just make sure that you're pulling patients out of your observation pool if you're putting them in. That brings me to observations. I'm just barely going to touch on this. When I do reviews with practices and some business coaching sessions, one of the number one questions I get asked is, where do I find these OBS patients that are ready to start treatment? So in Gaidge, we have two graphs. You have your pre-treatment OBS patients, which these are the patients that have not had any treatment with you. The next graph you're going to see are your between phases OBS patients. So they've had something and now we're continuing to monitor growth and development until they're ready for treatment again. Over to the right, you are going to be able to see the amount of patients in each age group. So when I look at these, I'm just going to kind of work through this. So we have 374 OBS between 1 and 10. We have 185 patients between 11 and 14. I don't know about you, but I see dollar signs in a healthy way, right? And good smiles. So if you are having trouble identifying these patients, I'd be happy to send you some instructions on how to pull that particular set of patients so that you guys can really start your new year with knowing a lot of patients that are already in relationship with you that need treatment. The other thing, to consider is, just looking at the patients, the OBS that you haven't seen. before COVID, I probably was on the bandwagon of like, see those patients every 6 months. You got to make sure that we're staying in relationship. Now, while I still think you have to stay in relationship, I think we've all evolved and changed quite a bit. I'm not as concerned about seeing them every 6 months as much as I am making sure that we don't get so comfortable not seeing them that we lose that top of mind awareness with them, so that when it is ready and is time for them to get started, that they're potentially going somewhere else. So just keep that in mind. Again, it doesn't, for me and my personal recommendation, it doesn't have to be over 10%, but you just want to make sure that you are doing something marketing wise to make sure you're staying in front of these patients. And then of course, if the doctor does need to see them for x-rays and things like that, going the extra mile to reach out and get them in. Same thing with your obs patients. This particular practice has 59. It would be really interesting to see if out of these patients, do we already have them scheduled, or maybe are they kind of occupying some of those, 12 plus monthers that we haven't seen. So just some food for thought there. Again, if you guys are interested or you aren't aware how to pull those reports, then please reach out. You can email support@gaidge.com. And I personally will be happy to send you a document that'll walk you through that. That's the filler word, right? So getting into my first, which is the schedule statistics, I want to talk to you about repair detail. So in my opinion, and I think that I speak for everyone here, repair appointments are kind of joy robbers, right? They rob you of extra time in your schedule. They can cause other patients who have, really amazingly scheduled appointments to maybe run behind, or maybe you're not able to pull those patients back on time because you have an emergency in the chair. The other thing is thinking about the patient experience. That's so important that the patients that are in treatment are speaking really well of our practice. And if we have a lot of breakage, that word of mouth referral can sometimes not be as awesome as we want it to be. What do repair appointments do? So, well, they're daily stress. They're stress for the team. Again, they're stress for the patient. They don't contribute positively to the experience that we want to give. And something else that I think is really interesting is these patients, when do they want to come in? It's always like after school, right? It's never like that 10 o'clock opening that you have. In Gaidge, we count repairs 2 different ways. So what you'll notice is the purple bar is going to be the actual additional visit. So this is when a patient outside of your, hoped, anticipated treatment plan are required to come in for an additional appointment to have something repaired. So this really is not fun. The other bar that stacks up is the detail. And so if you are looking at your Gaidge and you're not tracking this well, I would encourage you to reach out. I think there's a lot of benefit in not only knowing, this is the actionable item, right? I know for this particular practice for the month of December, they've averaged 12% of their appointments are repairs. We'll talk about how many that is in a minute, but think about, okay, so now what do I do? How do I improve that? And I think having the detail is just one more layer for you to help understand and help your team understand, where do we need to work, right? If you're having a lot of wire problems and those are predominantly your issue, maybe we need to add some sort of system where we're checking those wires before the patients leave. If it's brackets, I would get with your clinical team, have them, all set separate of each other and type out what their bonding protocol is, how much time in detail. Because what I bet you'll find if you have a lot of high bond failure is that you're going to get some vastly different answers on how they anticipate that bonding flow should go. So again, just some suggestions. How are you going to fix it? I think that again is up to the practice, but having the data really does support you in making a good choice and helping get you on the right track for some quality control within your clinical team.
And I will add one note real quick.
Yeah.
For those users that are on today, that are on Cloud9, tomorrow, we have an e-blast scheduled to go out specifically for you all. And you can also refer to the Gaidge help menu tomorrow on how to map fields for repairs to Cloud9. That is a relatively newer feature for that specific platform for us to report up. So if you are missing repair breakouts and that's something that's important to you, If you're on cloud nine, you'll get that message tomorrow. If you're not on cloud nine, still reach out to us or jump on help. And we're certainly happy to help you kind of set those up.
Yeah, gosh, thank you, Katie. That's perfect.
And there was one question that just popped up. How do you get the specifics for the repair visits into Gaidge? It is a mapping exercise. We can help you do it. You can do it yourself. And I get that should take care of you, Laurel. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was from a Cloud9 user. So tomorrow's your day.
How perfect. Something
Thanks,
else
Jessica.
that you want to know, like from a leadership perspective, when your clinic does start really tracking your repair visits as well as the detail, that details bar should always be equal to your repair visits bar or higher, meaning that you might even be able to start tracking for some of your regular appointments. And what I mean by that is if a patient comes in for a regular adjustment and they have a loose bracket, now it wasn't a repair visit, right? It wasn't scheduled outside of the regular sequence, but did you have to have a repair? Yes. And so there are instances where you can even do more detailed tracking, I guess I would say. Something to point out too, like 12%, this is considering, and the only part that's considered in this formula is the purple bar. Again, the other one isn't for your information so that you can take action. But our target is 5%. If you're a practice that I'm working with, I'm probably going to put you a little bit closer to 3%. I think these are avoidable. Any progress is amazing, but I also think that this is one of those things that if you're communicating it to your clinical team really well, then it can really help them understand the weight and what it's doing to them. Sometimes when we're so busy in the clinic, it's hard to see the forest for the trees and understand that if I take that extra minute right now to be very careful and bond appropriately, I'm going to save myself, my team, and the patients a lot of stress later down the road. So I just wanted to point this out. Again, I love it. I think it should be part of your monthly kind of incentive programs or anything that you have going on like that to really encourage your team to be their best at work. So,
and one more quick question on that one, Jessica. Question on if those are not equal, how can they be corrected?
So historically, it might be a little bit more tough. Moving forward, it would just be something that you could probably pull some reports within your software just to make sure that each repair visit that was entered had an associated detail with it. It might be software specific. So Katie, if you want to grab whomever is asking that question, I'm happy to talk with them offline.
Sure, and it's Cloud9, so we will help you address that once we're ready to go tomorrow.
So many wonderful things. So good. Again, if you have questions, and we'll talk about a few other things, always email at support@Gaidge. And then I also will have my email at the end of this if you have some questions today that you want to knock out or tomorrow. Before I move on, I just want you to look at this number. 1,371 repair visits. If you're about 20 to 30 minutes for each of those repair visits, that is a lot of time. I'm not even going to bother you with the math. All right, so treatment efficiency, and this is the last spot I'm going to park. If you guys have questions, Katie or myself will be happy to answer them, or if there's anything you want to talk a little bit more about. Value per visit, I love this. More importantly, I love this, estimated versus actual months to completion. So many of you tie your fee to the estimated months of treatment. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I think it is what it is, right? It's a good way to look at it. I know we don't particularly give that to our patients and people who are signing contracts because we don't want them to finish early and then, of course, think that they don't have to pay as much. But just knowing that that's how we kind of identify the amount of work that it's going to take us to complete the case is something that many of us do. One thing that I want you to check with this is just make sure you're not consistently going over what you estimate. So your estimated is going to show on the left-hand side. The actual is going to be a little bit more of a green color on the right-hand side. If you are consistently, taking longer than what you're estimating, you may not be charging enough for what you're doing. It could also be that you have inefficiencies that need to be worked on. But again, this is just something to consider. Maybe you know that as a doctor, and so you might estimate a little bit low so that the patient has a lower a lower fee. But just be mindful of that. Make sure that you're, and I say this only to say that I just want to make sure that you're charging, for the amount of work that you're performing. And of course, you do want to see these being a little bit more level to each other, estimated versus actual. All right. With that, Katie, are there any other questions?
I see no Jessica questions right now.
Wonderful. Okay, perfect. So let me switch over really quickly. Wonderful, to our Gaidge.com slide. I would just let you all know, if you have questions or are interested in practice management consulting, the QR code on your left will take you to schedule an intro call with one of our Impact 360 team members. If you're interested in the Gaidge Executive Program and really being a little bit more focused with your goal setting, similar to the projections, and tying in your overhead with your accounting software, then of course Gaidge Executive, a demo to that is on the right QR code. Again, my name is Jessica. My email address is up here as well. support@gaidge.com. We're always here to help. And if there's nothing else, I hope you guys have a wonderful Wednesday.